This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Well, China raises its tariffs on U.S. imports to 125%, upping the ante in the growing trade war between the world's two largest economies. Meantime, panic grips markets again. The U.S. dollar tumbles and gold hits a fresh record high as investors brace for more financial turmoil from the retaliatory moves. And in China's Greater Bay Area, where foreign trade is king, businesses scramble to react, rerouting shipments and reshuffling supply chains. And ousted South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol leaves a presidential residence a week after the Constitutional Court upheld his impeachment. Ahead on East Asia tonight, as China's bruising tariff war with the U.S. escalates, could the trade turmoil see a possible thaw in Beijing's ties with India, one enough to bring Asia's two largest economies together? And a sneak peek at the World Expo that opens this weekend in Osaka. We'll have an update from CNA's Michio Ishida on the innovations we can expect to see, as well as issues the six-month event faced in the lead-up. The tit-for-tat trade war between rival powers, the United States and China, has deepened. Beijing hitting back, announcing it will hike tariffs on American products to 125%, 2 days after it hiked duties to 84%. Well, the change will take effect starting tomorrow. China's latest move falls short of the 145% that U.S. President Donald Trump has slapped on Chinese goods this week. The U.S. leader is keeping the pressure on China, the second largest provider of American imports, while taking a softer approach to other trading partners. And this includes pushing the pause button on the reciprocal duties imposed on dozens of other countries for 90 days. Mr. Trump maintains that Washington could still make a deal with China.
What happens with China? We would love to be able to work a deal. They've really taken advantage of our country for a long period of time. They've ripped us off beyond nobody. How people stood for it, sitting in my position, is not even believable. And we're talking about many presidents, not just a couple. But they did, and all we're doing is putting it back in shape.
And for more, CNA's Deborah Wong, she joins us now. Deborah, China, hiking levies on U.S. imports to 125%. What message are they trying to send?
So China, in that same breath, in that same statement, says it will simply ignore any further escalations from the U.S. if they decide to persist with what China is calling a numbers games. And China also says that the current duty rates from the U.S. now lack any market viability. And if they do continue with this, any further increment will definitely make U.S. What China calls a laughing stock in the history of global economics. And in that same statement, again, China reiterated the stance that it has been giving out over the last few weeks, underlining that it will continue to enact any countermeasures and continue to see this through the end. Now, authorities have also today sued the U.S. for further tariff measures under the World Trade Organization dispute settlement mechanism on the grounds of what they describe as unilateral bullying as well as coercion from the U.S. Now, China's response to Trump is not surprising in the least. If you remember last month, authorities said that it's ready to fight any type of war with the U.S. But at the same time, we're also seeing China try to balance that out by deepening ties with other trade partners. Just today, in fact, Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, with both sides pledging to promote China-EU ties, basically to safeguard international rules and trade order, as well as to resist bullying. And what we can see collectively from these two actions are two messages. One, for China to reassure its people that its domestic economy can continue to grow despite external threats. And number two, that it's positioning itself as an open economy, a viable global trade partner in the face of U.S. protectionism. Ateli.
Very good stuff there. Thanks so very much. CNA's Deborah Wong will speak with you a little later for more analysis on the possible impact to the Chinese economy. Now, China is stepping up its diplomatic outreach in the meantime with hopes of boosting economic ties with other countries as trade tensions with the U.S. soar to new heights. And as you heard from our correspondent Deborah Wong earlier, Chinese President Xi Jinping in his meeting with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez in Beijing urged the European Union to jointly resist unilateral bullying practices and that China and the bloc should shoulder their international responsibilities. Well, the appeal comes amid unpredictable policies of U.S. President Donald Trump that have caused instability in the global financial markets. Mr. Sanchez called for a more balanced relationship between the EU and China. He's the first European leader to visit China following Washington's sweeping tariffs, with an aim to forge closer economic and political ties with Beijing.
España y la Unión Europea defendemos los mismos principios, los mismos valores y los mismos intereses. Y la política exterior de España no va contra nadie. Al contrario, va en favor del multilateralismo, del entendimiento entre naciones y también, lógicamente, de un comercio basado en reglas claras que beneficien la prosperidad compartida de todas las naciones.
Beijing's efforts to rally support against Washington have focused mainly on Europe, with several high-level talks already held on the matter. The South China Morning Post reports that several EU leaders are planning a Beijing visit in late July for a summit with Mr. Xi. No date has been confirmed. But Beijing has engaged ASEAN as well, with Mr. Xi set to visit the bloc's chair, Malaysia, next week. He's also expected to tour member countries, Cambodia and Vietnam. But reports suggest not all are willing to engage with China, despite their displeasure over U.S. tariffs. India is said to have turned down a Chinese call for cooperation. Australia as well declined to join hands with China, saying it speaks for itself, adding its national interest must come first. Well, businesses in China's Greater Bay Area, a region that's heavily dependent on foreign trade, are scrambling to make sense of the evolving U.S. tariffs. With China singled out with a tax rate as high as 145%, companies are mulling their options. Well, CNA's Deborah Wong with this report.
Cross-border e-commerce has been a bright spot in post-pandemic China, recording a growth of 10.8% in 2024 and accounting for 6% of the country's total foreign trade. But Trump's tariffs could now dim its prospects. Logistics companies in Shenzhen, China's e-commerce nerve center, are at a loss.
Everybody just holding on, see what's really going on, because every day is new tax rate. Our factory customer and their customer just email them, tell them stop producing those products, and then all the inventory say in the warehouse don't send out yet. I think the whole China order will reduce the containers.
Mr. Lin says about 40% of his customers export products to the U.S. In the lead-up to the Trump presidency, Mr. Lin's backup plan was to divert shipment to Southeast Asia. Though Vietnam was first hit by additional U.S. tariffs, it's now on pause as they navigate trade deal talks.
A lot of logistics companies will already prepare to go to Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and then send to U.S. Chinese seller plan to send some product produced in Vietnam and then assemble together and then send to U.S.
Mr. Lin's Shenzhen-based company, which started in 2017, has gone through 2 trade wars.
In the past, I still think we can predict how much going to be conflict or how big it will be. But this time, Trump don't play by the book. Today, he say that, tomorrow he say another stuff. So it's hard to tell.
It's not just logistics companies that are taking a hit. Across the Greater Bay Area, property developers still reeling from a nationwide housing crisis may see costs surge. The Hong Kong Construction Association said that the industry relies on a stable supply chain for building materials, tech and equipment. Industry players are now looking at diversifying sources of supply.
I personally will certainly be looking more into mainland Chinese-made products, simply because it's a big market. I know there's cost benefits. So on the back of this shutdown of overseas brands coming in, I hope to replace some of those things with locally available ones.
For Hong Kong-based designer John Chow, who has projects in the mainland, that means competing for supply from the same pool.
There is a preference with developers in China to use locally available products. And I'm not sure if this is because to mitigate the potential of tariff risk, supply chain, or other reasons. Most of our supply chain for construction in Hong Kong actually mostly comes from China. We'll probably expect to see a rise in costs in terms of construction, and that's probably what we have to factor in most as we move forward.
But Mr. Chow believes there's a silver lining to all this.
Big business may be struggling, but there's always opportunities in small business. They might want to do things a bit differently, and as a result, designers like us can step in and help. You need innovation in times of difficulty, and that's basically where we shine.
That's once again, go back to our CNA's Deborah Wong. Deb, U.S. taking a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, but they are keeping the pressure on China, as we've seen. What does this all mean for businesses in the Greater Bay Area, as well as the Chinese economy?
Thank you, Atali. To answer your question, joining me today in our Hong Kong studio is Professor He Wai Tang. He's the Director of Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. And Professor, thank you for being here. So, the latest round of tariffs, it's ongoing. It doesn't look like there's any sign of stopping. Is there a way for U.S.-China relations to move forward?
Well, both countries are playing tit for tat. Both sides are putting over 120% tariffs on each other. Every day the tariffs rates are increasing. Luckily, President Xi Jinping from China said 125% should be the final number that they will put on U.S. imports. So it takes time for the tariff to really affect the economies. So whoever suffers more first probably will have more incentive to back down. I think eventually both sides are going to come together to negotiate, but it's not likely that it's going to happen in the next couple of days or couple of weeks.
When we take a step closer into China, we want to look at Guangdong province, Greater Bay Area. It actually accounts for the biggest driver in foreign trade and also in China. E-commerce, for instance, has been a huge growth for the GBA. Will the tariffs squeeze this pond dry?
So Guangdong is a very export-oriented province of China. But compared to the rest of China, Guangdong is probably in a relatively more upstream in the supply chains. They are producing, a lot of high-tech, advanced manufacturing products. So the profit margin for Guangdong companies tend to be slightly higher than the rest of the country's companies. So I think, their ability to absorb some of the shocks are probably slightly better than the rest of Chinese, communities. But, I guess 125% tariffs is really big. So, in the last 6 years, since 2018, a lot of the companies have already gone out to establish the supply chains in Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. So they probably would do even more than that. Luckily, at least from the perspective of ASEAN, tariffs are no longer in place for the next 90 days. So we probably will see even more our direct investment from China to those regions.
And we also look at the other growth engine in the GBA in Guangdong as well, the property sector. In fact, it's caused a drag. It's let down, the GDP growth for Guangdong province in the last 3 years. Do you foresee that the tariffs could affect that recovery rate?
So it's certainly slowed down the recovery pace. But I think it is, actually good news for, the Chinese government in the sense that they probably have, more reasons to motivate companies in China to sell more of the goods and services domestically. Private consumption share of GDP of China has been lower than 40%. China is a huge market, 1.4 billion people. They really need to think about, how to expand domestic consumption to fight off all this external pressure.
And when we talk about external pressure, China's stance has always been consistent. They want to maintain multilateralism. They want to remain open with other trading partners. But so far, all the things that's been going on, do you think foreign investors will be deterred?
American investment probably will continue to drop, given the tariffs and all this tension between the two superpowers. I think the Chinese government is going to, engage more with the non-American part of the world. The Spanish Prime Minister currently is talking to President Xi. Europe is going to be a very important destination market for some of the Chinese goods, but they really have to manage, all these exports of cheap and high-quality goods to those countries because it may actually trigger additional tariffs from those places. But all in all, I think China has been trying to engage more globally and support multilateralism. It's very clear that the U.S. government is not very interested in doing that kind of job.
And how else should China bolster its own domestic economy? Are there any bright spots at all we can see from this situation?
Well, economists inside and outside of China have been proposing the Chinese government to issue more consumption vouchers and issue more stimulus packages to boost consumption. In the last 2 years, we have seen that the Chinese government is more eager to support production and increase production productivity. And finally, starting from the beginning of this year, we started hearing more signals, more mentions of consumption as a very important driver of the economy. In addition to the tariffs right now, I think the Chinese government is even more eager to find ways to stimulate consumption. I am cautiously optimistic that consumption as a share of GDP is going to increase because there's no way that Chinese companies will be able to rely on the U.S. market with such a high tariff.
And right now we're in Hong Kong. So what kind of bright spots do you think Hong Kong can glean out of this?
So some of the goods are going to flow to Hong Kong because of the over 100% tariffs imposed by the U.S. government. The U.S. dollar has depreciated a bit against non-RMB currencies. Hong Kong people have been going to Japan and all these other places because of our strong Hong Kong dollar, which is pegged with the U.S. dollar. Now, the silver lining is, our currency appears to be weaker than before, and I expect that the U.S. dollar will continue to weaker, to stay on the weak side if the U.S. government continue to impose tariffs on China and the rest of the world. So, I think, goods are going to become cheaper in Hong Kong, and it's going to attract more tourists to come, and our own people will stay in Hong Kong more often to consume.
Thank you, Professor. So what we're hearing is that, businesses are going to have to continue to adapt with this evolving situation. And thank you very much, Professor, for joining us today. That was Professor Hei Wai Tang, Director of Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. Vitaly.
Thanks so very much for that, CNA Shenzhen correspondent Dara Wong from Hong Kong. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the U.S. president changes his stance yet again on Nippon Steel's bid to buy U.S. steel. And economists warning the 10% blanket levy on most imports will raise prices 3% overall for American consumers. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for your business news updates with Roland Lim. Roland, the trade war between the two world's largest economies heating up again. What bearing did it have on the equity markets today?
I'll tell you, we will see a more pronounced reaction to China's latest moves when the markets reopen next week. Remember, the announcement came just right after the mainland markets closed today, but it is fair to say investors are in the grip of panic and uncertainty. Worries about the economic fallout from the rapidly escalating U.S.-China trade war overshadowed President Trump's move to postpone most of his new tariffs for 90 days. The Nikkei 225, 3% lower at the end of a punishingly volatile week. South Korea's Kospi index ending 0.5% lower, while the Taiwan-weighted index still buoyant on the 90-day tariff pause. Hong Kong and Chinese stocks reversed earlier declines and narrowed the week's losses. The chips share rally and a potential state buying shielded more against the losses from the escalating trade war. TikTok's international's revenue reportedly boomed last year as China-based parent ByteDance faces a deadline to sell the app or have it banned in the US. According to a tech news outlet, sales from international operations, mostly TikTok, soared some 63% to $39 billion in 2024, while net profit grew 6% to $33 billion. TikTok's sizzling pace of growth has come into focus since Washington mandated that the social video platform find a buyer or exit its biggest market. U.S. President Trump last week extended an April 5th deadline for 75 days for TikTok to find a non-Chinese buyer or face a ban. ByteDance, while confirming recently that it was in talks with the U.S. government towards finding a solution, warned that there remain, quote, key matters to resolve. Apart from backtracking on his aggressive tariffs, U.S. President Trump also changed his stance again on the proposed takeover of U.S. steel by Japan's Nippon Steel. He's now indicating he does not want to see the iconic American firm under Japanese ownership. Mr. Trump said that Nippon Steel will instead be an investor in U.S. steel without providing details on what that entails. Remember, just days earlier, he had ordered a fresh review into Nippon Steel's $14 billion bid, which was blocked by the Biden administration on national security concerns. U.S. steel shares fell about 9.5% overnight. Shares earlier created more than 10% in the biggest intraday decline since early February. A tech giant Apple has reportedly taken steps to beat Trump's tariffs by airlifting over 1.5 million iPhones to the US from India by chartered cargo flights. Reuters report that Apple booked about 6 cargo jets with a capacity of 90 tons each to transport the iPhones. The move started in March. One shipment is said to be happening this week, just as a new batch of tariffs kick in. Now, Apple had reportedly lobbied Indian authorities to cut its custom processing time to 6 hours from 30 hours. The move gives an insight as to how American firms are navigating the murky tariff waters. Analysts have warned that U.S. prices of iPhones could surge given Apple's high reliance on imports from China. Apple has diversified its manufacturing beyond China, with India now positioned for a critical role. Foxconn and Tata, its 2 main suppliers in India, have 3 factories in all, with 2 more being built. American EV maker Tesla has suspended taking new orders for its Model S and Model X vehicles on the Chinese website as the world's number 2 economies exchange blows in a trade war. The site no longer offers an order a new car option for its Model S and X, but the selection is still available for the Model 3 and Y EVs. Now, Tesla imports its Model S and X vehicles from the US and produces its Model 3 and Y in Shanghai. Now, Tesla has yet to comment on the changes. The move is unlikely to have a significant impact on Tesla's presence in China. The US giant has been struggling to keep up in the country as domestic automakers outpace it in sales, pricing, and innovation. But sales worldwide have been tumbling as well, largely due to a backlash against CEO Elon Musk and his relationship with President Donald Trump. Economist John Maynard Keynes famously said, "In the long run, we are all dead." But what about the short run? Well, U.S. consumers can expect prices to rise by nearly 3% on average, based on an analysis by the Budget Lab at Yale University. Now, that translates to an additional cost of some $4,700 for an average American household per year. And that's with the 10% blanket levies after the Trump administration paused most of its reciprocal tariffs for 90 days. The tariff turmoil over the past week sent global markets into a frenzy. But analysts say it was the volatility in the bond market that forced President Trump to put a pause on the tariffs. U.S. retailers are warning of price hikes and product shortages as they seek to navigate around muddy economic waters. Now, prices of fresh produce could increase by more than 5%, motor vehicles up 12%, and clothing could spike by more than 60%. While the rest of the world has been granted a 3-month reprieve, the U.S. has turned up the heat with China. Ultimately, President Trump is building a wall of tariffs, but the market fears that Americans will have to pay for it. And that is the latest in business. Oteli.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, a meteorite from Mars, Chinese bamboo scrolls, and even algae-inspired Hello Kitty figurines set to feature at the soon-to-open Osaka Expo, touting unity in turbulent times. And former South Korean leader Yoon Suk Yeol moves out of the presidential compound after the Constitutional Court upheld his impeachment last week. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we are following. China increases its tariffs on U.S. imports to 125%, hitting back against President Donald Trump. The U.S. leader has hiked duties on Chinese goods by 145% since he took office. The dollar tumbles and gold hits a fresh record high amid market panic as investors again flee to safe havens in reaction to the retaliatory move. And ousted South Korean leader Yoon Suk Yeol leaves the presidential compound 1 week after the Constitutional Court upheld his impeachment. Well, the World Expo opens to the public in Osaka, Japan this Sunday, amid teething problems and domestic concerns over construction and operating costs. Well, the event is held every 5 years and aims to bring people together amid global turmoil. It's supposed to drive innovation, address challenges facing humankind. Well, CNA's Mitya Ishida gives us a sneak peek.
Countries are putting the final touches on their pavilions at the World Expo, which is taking place on Yumeshima, a reclaimed island in Osaka Bay. Excitement about the expo is building up, but more adjustments are needed before it opens to the public. Last week, organizers held a test run ahead of the official opening to iron out any problems. About 98,000 people participated over 3 days. Issues reported included long queues with up to an hour's wait to enter the venue. A high level of methane gas was also detected in an underground pit for electrical equipment. And the Brazil pavilion caught fire, damaging its ceiling. This is the Japan Pavilion, which seeks to trace the origin and cycle of life. Its crowd pleaser is likely to be this meteorite from Mars, found in Antarctica, and showcased for the first time. Connecting the past to the future. This facility cultivates microscopic algae, an age-old organism that's now seen as having boundless potential, as introduced by Japan's beloved mascot, Hello Kitty. Over at the USA Pavilion, it takes visitors on an exploration of space with a moon rock from the Apollo 17 mission in 1972. LED screens display images that reflect Japan's ties to the US.
Everything that you see here is part of the demonstration of the strong relationship that we have with both government to government as well as to people. I think that the relationship between the Japanese people and the American people is one of breadth as well as depth. It runs between culture, between sports, within arts and entertainment, within the long-standing relationship of people flowing from across our countries.
China is making its presence felt too, with a pavilion shaped like a traditional calligraphy scroll. In a hint of the space race, it highlights its successful lunar mission last year. As part of the expo, an international art festival will also be held, with works displayed across Osaka, including the expo site. But the expo has faced criticism for inflated costs amounting to billions of yen.
この時代にですね、なぜ万博をやるのかという疑問の声もよくあります。160カ国近くのですね、国々が関わる大きなイベントがあります。で、その万博のインパクトをですね、未来へ生かすためにこのタイミングしかないと思って準備しました。
158 countries and regions are registered to participate in the expo, which carries the theme Designing Future Society for Our Lives. It will run for 6 months till 13th of October.
And for more, CNA's Mitya Ishida, she joins us from the expo grounds at Yumeshima, which is a man-made island in Osaka Bay. Well, Mitya, from your story earlier, we saw these pavilions. They've got a lot of interesting exhibits. So tell us a little bit more about the mood in Osaka ahead of its opening.
Yes, sure. Well, Otelli, behind me is the Osaka Pavilion. It features the advanced technology of healthcare and medicine. Now, let me move a little bit to the side. You see this wooden structure right behind me? It's called the Grand Ring, and it's regarded as the world's largest outdoor wooden structure. It's 2 kilometers in circumference, and it's been recognized by the Guinness World Record. Well, so the mood is getting better, more excitement building up as Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako have visited the pavilions today. And the expo mascot is everywhere. Let me show you. Do you think it's cute? Lots of eyeballs. That's the expo mascot, and you can see the mascots everywhere on the streets of Osaka. Well, organizers say this month ticket sales started to pick up with about 50,000 tickets selling a day. Ticket sales are an important source of revenue for the expo. 14 million tickets were actually on sale from the end of November, and as of the 2nd of April, 60% were sold. Now, the problem initially was that the system was too complicated. You had to register the dates, the time, each pavilion, you had to make an appointment. And it was also the case with us media here on Media Day. For instance, we had to book a slot with the Japan pavilion in order to go in there and do our filming and coverage. So it's a little bit complicated, but they're trying to ease the system right now. Now, costs to host this expo has been ballooning due to a higher labor cost and material prices. It's financed with 1/3 shouldered by Osaka, another 1/3 by the national government, and another 1/3 by the private sector. Now, organizers are pleased that more and more companies are coming forward to sponsor this expo. Media polls a year ago showed that the majority of public was not interested in the expo. And I heard that initially Osaka residents were unhappy, especially because taxpayers' money was poured into this expo. And that meant 27,000 yen, about $190 a person had to pay for this expo. That's the residents of Osaka. But local residents seem not to be so upset anymore. In January, many residents said that they were not interested, but now it seems a little different. Here's what they told me.
多分行かない。その理由は中身があんまり分からへんと、なんかあんまり人多いの僕好きじゃないんで。各国のパビリオンがどんな感じかっていうのは、自分の目で一回見たいなとは思います。
リングがすごく大きいっていうふうに聞いてるので、それ一回登ってみたいなと思ってます。
上海の万博に見たことあるから、それすごい人いっぱいで並んでるから、もし行ったら必ずついてると先見に行く。
Mitch, you're glad to hear their interest is picking up among the Osaka residents. Nevertheless, you mentioned quite a bit about all these teething problems from, costs to queues. So with the expo about to open to the public, do you think it's ready to welcome them?
Well, there was a 3-day test run earlier this month. And during that time, there were 98,000 people visiting. And the organizers tried to identify problems, and problems already were identified. For instance, there was a long waiting to enter pavilions, and we've heard that QR codes were not functioning properly. We heard that the Brazilian pavilion was on fire, and there was a high-level methane gas detected because this is reclaimed land. So there were some glitches, but we hope that all these will be solved by Sunday on opening day. Now, I actually talked to a woman who participated in the test run, and she told me that before she thought the expo was not something of her interest. She didn't want to come, but now that she's experienced the expo, she's really excited, and she wants to come again and experience the other pavilions she was not able to. Well, Japanese actually take time to build excitement, ahead of big events. For the Osaka Expo 1970, for 2005 Aichi Expo, it was the same. But for the Osaka Expo, we hear that there were 64 million visiting. And here at this Osaka Expo 2025, the target is 28 million visitors. So it sounds to be a little bit modest, given that the Japanese will certainly become excited when everything opens and starts running.
Yeah, teething problems aside, the wooden structure behind you, which is the world's largest, is simply stunning. Well, thank you so very much for that report. CNA's Michio Ishida, live from Osaka. Now, impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has left the presidential compound today after the country's constitutional court dismissed him last week. Supporters and protesters gathered at the compound and on the streets, their chants growing louder as Mr. Yoon waved and shook hands with supporters. Similar scenes when he arrived at his private property in the capital's south. Mr. Yoon, his wife, and their 11 pets were accompanied by a security team of around 50 bodyguards. The former leader can receive protection from the Presidential Security Service for up to 10 years. Last week, the court unanimously ruled to remove Mr. Yoon from office. South Koreans will head to the polls for a snap election on the 3rd of June. The latest opinion poll suggests former Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung is firmly in the lead at 37%, and in second place at 9% is former Labour Minister Kim Won-soo. Among the presidential hopefuls with a 2% favorability is acting President Han Duck-soo, who only announced his bid yesterday. Coming up on East Asia tonight, trade turmoil from the ongoing US-China tariff war could see Asia's two largest economies coming closer together. China has pledged more than $130 million in emergency humanitarian assistance to earthquake-stricken Myanmar. The move comes 2 weeks after a magnitude 7.7 tremor devastated parts of the country, with the death toll now surpassing 3,600. But China says that the funds will provide urgently needed food, medicine, and prefabricated homes, as well as pay for medical and epidemic prevention expert groups. Beijing has sent first response teams, including dozens of medical workers, earthquake experts, field hospital workers, and rescue dogs. It says it would also participate in disaster loss assessment and reconstruction. Well, the UN Rights Office, meanwhile, has repeated a call for Myanmar's military to remove obstacles in the way of aid delivery. The agency has also decried attacks by the military despite an ongoing ceasefire. It noted that since the quake, military forces have conducted over 120 strikes, with more than half of them occurring after the truce was declared last week. Now, most of these attacks involved aerial and artillery strikes, even in areas impacted by the earthquake. Earlier, CNA's Julie Yu and Arnold Gay spoke to Tom Andrews, UN Special Rapporteur to Myanmar, and he told us how the conflict in Myanmar is affecting relief operations following the deadly earthquake.
This has been a disaster on top of a disaster. I mean, you had already 20 million people in need of humanitarian aid, Julie, before the earthquake hit. You have half the population falling under the poverty line before the earthquake hit. So you already had a very devastating situation in Myanmar, of course, exacerbated by the conflict that is raging across the country. Add to that this devastating earthquake. And what's happened in the past, of course, we've seen that the military junta has weaponized aid going into or trying to get into natural disasters. This is no exception. We've seen aid blockaded. We have had aid workers interrogated, extorted. We have a conscription program in which young people are terrified that they're going to be put into the military service when they try to provide help in this horrible situation. So it's a disaster on top of a disaster. On top of that, you had the military launching airstrikes, including in some of the areas most devastated by this earthquake. They declared a ceasefire finally after significant international pressure. But now we've been getting many, many reports of violations of that ceasefire and significant loss of life, not just from the earthquake, but now from these aerial attacks by the military.
Understood, Tom. I'm just wondering, though, given the challenges you've outlined and the history behind it, I'm wondering how the United Nations and all the aid bodies on the ground are trying to address these problems, trying to meet the challenges head on, despite, what you're facing on the ground and what the military has been doing?
Well, I think it's a multiple approach is required. Number one, I think those countries with any kind of relationship with a military junta have to be applying pressure on them to stop aerial attacks, to allow aid to get through to where it needs to go through. Secondly, we need to be taking aid and funneling it to those organizations and networks, those CSOs, those volunteer organizations, community organizations, village networks that exist out there that have connections to those areas most hard hit, that are not getting the aid that they need to. Those groups and networks need to be more fully resourced so that aid can get to where it needs to go. Listen, we've got millions of people in need of significant humanitarian aid. There's lack of food, lack of medicine, lack of clean water, lack of electricity. There are significant needs there. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be needed in order to deal with this crisis. We've got to get that aid in whatever way that we can, through formal channels, through informal channels. And I'm hoping that that's what we're going to be able to do in a much more effective way moving forward.
And that was Tom Andrews, UN Special Rapporteur to Myanmar. We've got more coverage on this crisis on our website, cna.asia. Now, China, India and other Southeast Asian nations, including Singapore, are among those that dispatched relief supplies, aiding in recovery efforts in quick-hit areas, home to about 28 million people. U.S. President Donald Trump's seesawing tariff strategy may be upending markets around the world, but it seems to be bringing two of Asia's largest economies together. Well, after years of frosty ties, India and China have their eyes on a bilateral thaw. Ishan Garg reports from New Delhi.
Until a few years ago, half of all raw materials needed to make these furniture products came from China. But that volume has been cut significantly. Naresh Gupta says he can now only bring in parts that cannot be made locally.
अगर हम चाहें तो यहीं बना सकते हैं. टेक्नोलॉजी हो सकता है हमें चाइना से लेनी पड़े, रॉ मटेरियल हो सकता है चाइना से लेना पड़े, लेकिन हम प्रायोरिटी देंगे कि हम यहीं बनाएं.
Since 2020, following a deadly border standoff between Indian and Chinese soldiers, India restricted imports and implemented stricter customs checks and anti-dumping measures, allowing only essential items to come in. It also put a blanket ban on Chinese investments. Naresh, who is also president of the India-China Chamber of Commerce, says this needs to change.
अगर सरकार उनको सहूलियत दे तो वो कल से आने शुरू हो जाएंगी. लेकिन गवर्नमेंट की पॉलिसी के कारण यहाँ पर 2-2 साल परमिशन नहीं मिलती है, उनको वीजा नहीं मिलता है. सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम ये आ रही है, चाइनीज लोग इंडिया आना चाहते हैं, उनको वीजा नहीं मिल रहा है.
Analysts say Chinese investment would not just help small businesses, but could also bolster India's large-scale manufacturing.
If we are able to have more and more Chinese manufacturing happening in India, then things that we are going to import will be manufactured locally in India with India's inputs into it, and then makes India's exports competitive as well.
Chinese electronics giants Haier and Lenovo are reportedly already looking at making products in India for US export. They are hoping to capitalize on the pause on US duties for Indian goods, while those made in China still face 125% tariffs. Experts say the latest White House announcement gives Indian exports a competitive edge against Chinese goods, but that Chinese companies moving manufacturing here is also an example of how Delhi-Beijing partnership can insulate both economies from American tariffs.
ये देश के लिए बहुत अच्छा है, दोनों देशों के लिए अच्छा है. अगर ये हो जाएगा तो जो अमेरिका वगैरह हमें आंखें दिखा रहे हैं, उससे हम लोगों को बहुत फायदा होगा.
What India does have to worry about, though, is its trade imbalance with China. New Delhi's trade deficit with Beijing was at $85 billion last year, from just over $50 billion in 2019. Analysts say it's primarily because India relies on China for machinery and for raw materials for the pharmaceutical and electronics sector. Experts say allowing Chinese firms to invest in India could significantly bring down that trade imbalance, and that a potentially equal trading relationship could just be the incentive both sides need to keep future border skirmishes at bay. New Delhi and Beijing seem to agree. This meeting at the BRICS summit in Kazan last October had set the ball rolling, when President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi held talks for the first time in 5 years. Last month, as the world readied for Trump's tariff announcements, Prime Minister Modi appeared on American podcaster Lex Friedman's show and said this.
तो हम तो चाहेंगे कि भारत चीन के बीच में स्पर्धा सब स्वाभाविक है. स्पर्धा कोई गलत चीज नहीं है. ये संघर्ष नहीं होना चाहिए.
In early April, President Xi responded by saying it is time for the dragon and the elephant to tango. But experts say this has become a dance of necessity.
Now, because of Trump pushing his way, particularly through tariff hikes, some of the other alternatives will become more feasible in that sense. If Trump is everybody's challenged, then everyone is trying to look at alternatives.
Both India and China are on US President Donald Trump's list of so-called worst offending countries, and Beijing is now urging New Delhi to stand with it and make the most of their trade relationship. There are, however, concerns of Chinese firms dumping cheap products if trade barriers are lifted, with one report warning India is at high risk of oversupply from China. It's why businesses say India needs to play its cards right in balancing its relationship with its two biggest trade partners. Ishan Garg, CNA, New Delhi.
Meantime, toy companies and stores in the U.S. have warned prices will go up this Christmas because of President Trump's tariffs. A majority of toys sold in the States are actually manufactured in China, prompting some businesses to stock up ahead of time.
Joe Novak has been busy placing orders for his Atlanta, Georgia area toy shop, trying to get ahead of the mounting tariffs looming over Chinese imports.
I went ahead this morning. I probably placed in the last 2 days 8 orders or so, just to get ahead of my best sellers, my evergreens, the things I have to have in. Fat Brain, where it's made in China.
For Novak's family-owned Kazoo Toys, which sources the vast majority of its products from China, President Donald Trump's tariffs are a major threat. On Wednesday, the U.S. president lowered tariffs on dozens of countries for 90 days in a stunning reversal. But China has been the outlier.
It's a great idea to be able to make things over here, but you got to remember the entire toy infrastructure is in China and Asia. And you can't just turn around and make a plastic fabrication machine or the machinery doesn't exist.
Novak said it would take years to build up the infrastructure and knowledge, meaning missing the busiest period, Christmas.
There's no opportunity to mass produce toys here in the U.S. In the short or medium term. The production capabilities that have been built up in China over decades is really the only way for this year where toys will be made and brought into the country.
Trump says he wants to bring back manufacturing to the U.S., but the constantly changing policy makes it risky to invest for the long term.
The pipeline of people that know how to do those things don't exist. So it's not something you could turn around in a month or two. I mean, it's a multi-year process, and no one wants to miss Christmas for multiple years.
Maybe it's not a bad idea to start buying your Christmas presents early. On that note, it's time to wrap up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. I hope you've enjoyed our bulletin. And don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And if you need more information, go to Facebook and YouTube. Have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Good night.